Tonight, a waitress opens a sealed envelope at the end of her shift and finds $5,000 in cash. The note inside is signed by a regular customer who has been dead for 2 weeks. She is the 18th woman in 9 cities across 2 states to receive one. 5 stories tonight. A retired federal regulator versus an HOA over the wrong shade of mulch. A grandmother who forged her way into a daycare. A figure in a hospital window. A help desk technician, and 247 paper jams. And the envelope. Story 1. A homeowner gets a $50 fine from his HOA for the wrong shade of mulch. The HOA does not know that the man who bought the corner lot 6 months earlier spent the previous 22 years writing the federal regulations the HOA is now violating. Story 2. A working mother drops her 4-year-old at a new daycare with one rule, posted on the front door. Only badge guardians may pick up. On the 3rd afternoon, a woman the staff has never seen before walks in with a badge. Story 3. A night shift hospital cleaner working the surgical recovery floor begins noticing someone behind her in the dark window reflections. When she turns, the corridor is empty. It happens every shift for 7 nights. Story 4. A new IT director announces that only he will decide what counts as a Priority 1 ticket. By the end of his first month, his junior technician has filed 247 of them. And Story 5, the envelope, the $5,000, the dead regular, and the pattern that, once a probate clerk in Wichita started reading the notebook, went back 19 years. Our first story comes from r/ProRevenge. The narrator, we'll call him Walter, is 66 years old, recently retired, and has lived in his current house for exactly 6 months when this story begins. Walter and his wife had bought the house in early spring. It was a corner lot in a planned community in the Northeast, the kind with a homeowners association, a strict architectural review committee, and 17 pages of covenants printed in 9-point font. Walter had read every page before signing. He had also asked the seller's agent, before signing, 3 specific questions about which provisions of the covenants conflicted with state law. The seller's agent, Walter writes, had stared at him for what felt like a long time before answering. Walter had spent the previous 22 years as a senior attorney for a federal consumer protection agency. He had personally drafted or substantively revised 6 of the 17 federal rules cited as the basis for several common HOA fine schedules across the country. He knew exactly what an HOA could and could not legally do. He had also chosen, very deliberately, to say none of this when he moved in. The first letter from the Architectural Review Committee arrived on a Tuesday in May. It informed Walter that the mulch in his front bed planters was the wrong shade. Specifically, it was a natural cedar brown, and Section 14.3, subsection B, of the covenants required dark brown to black hardwood mulch. The fine was $50, payable within 14 days, with an additional $50 per day after that. Walter checked the covenants. He checked the Architectural Review Board's published color guide. He checked the actual color of his mulch with a paint deck swatch he kept in his garage from his old job. The mulch was, by the published guide, well within tolerance. He wrote a polite letter back. He included photographs. He included a measurement of the mulch's reflectance against the published color tolerance. He requested, formally, that the fine be vacated. The committee responded with a second letter. Same $50 fine. New date. They added, in the new letter, that subjective compliance with the visual standard rests with the committee. Walter wrote another polite letter. This one cited 2 specific provisions of the state's HOA Reform Act, passed in 2018, requiring fines to be tied to objective standards published in the covenants. He gave them 10 business days to respond. They did not respond. They did, however, mail him a 3rd fine. At this point, Walter, in his words, stopped writing letters and started filing them. Over the next 90 days, in his retirement, with no urgency and considerable enjoyment, he filed a State Attorney General Consumer Protection complaint, a federal fair housing complaint citing the disparate enforcement records he had pulled from the HOA's own published meeting minutes, and 3 separate small claims suits. The HOA's response, when it came 2 months later, was a 4-page letter from their attorney. It contained, Among other things, a paragraph asserting that the committee's authority was, quote, broad and substantially undefined. Walter says he printed the paragraph, framed it, and hung it in his garage. The state attorney general's office opened a formal review of the HOA's fine practices in August. In response to Walter's complaint and a 19 separate complaints from other residents that Walter had, without ever identifying himself as the federal regulator he had been, quietly suggested by email those neighbors might also wish to file. The Federal Fair Housing Review found a documented pattern of disparate enforcement. The HOA's insurance carrier dropped them in October. The board of directors resigned in 2 waves, 3 in November for an early December. The new board, elected at the January annual meeting, voted unanimously to dissolve the Architectural Review Committee and to rewrite the covenants with the assistance of an outside attorney recommended by the state agency. Walter's mulch, he notes in the post's final line, is still cedar brown. Walter's story is about a man who knew exactly what could be done and chose to do it patiently. Our next narrator did not have that luxury. She got, instead, 90 seconds to make a decision, and the only thing standing between a 4-year-old and the wrong adult was a 22-year-old receptionist on her 3rd week. Our next story comes from our /EntitledParents. Our narrator is the new director of a small daycare in a suburb outside Minneapolis. She started in late August. The story takes place over 4 working days in early September. The daycare had, our narrator says, exactly one non-negotiable rule, posted in 18-point font on the front door of the building, on every parent intake form, and on a laminated card placed on every classroom check-in clipboard. The rule was, only badge guardians may pick up a child. A badge was a small plastic card with a photograph, the child's first name, and a unique numeric identifier. To get a badge, an adult had to come to the front office during business hours, present photo identification, sign a form witnessed by a staff member, be photographed for the badge, and have the badge issued and laminated by the office manager. The badge cost $12. Our narrator had inherited this rule from the previous director and had inherited, with it, a single delicate case file. A 4-year-old we'll call Marcus. Marcus had been at the daycare for 2 years. His mother, the only badge guardian on his file, was a registered nurse who worked 12-hour shifts at a hospital 11 miles away. On the 2nd Wednesday of September, at 3:45 in the afternoon, a woman walked into the front office and presented a daycare badge with Marcus's name and a numeric identifier the system did not recognize. She was approximately 60 years old, wore a gray cardigan, and was, our narrator says, unusually pleasant. The receptionist, a 22-year-old named Brittany who had been in the job for 3 weeks, was new enough to the system that she did not immediately notice that the badge had a slightly different font on the laminate. She did, however, notice that the numeric identifier did not match the one in the system. She did exactly what she had been trained to do. She told the woman, with apologies, that she'd need to make a quick verification call to the parent on file, and asked the woman to wait. The woman said she'd wait. She sat in the lobby. She put her hands in her lap. Brittany walked into the office and called the mother. The mother answered on the 2nd ring. Brittany asked casually whether the mother had authorized anyone else to pick up Marcus today. The mother said no. What? Brittany, in her words from the staff incident report, kept her voice even. She said someone with a badge for Marcus was in the lobby. The mother said, "What does she look like?" Brittany described the woman. There was a pause on the line that the mother, later, said was the longest 5 seconds of her adult life. The mother said, "That is my mother-in-law. She is not authorized to pick up my son. We have a restraining order." The mother said, "Lock the office. Do not give her my son. Stall her. I am calling the police now." Brittany did. She walked back into the lobby with what she later described as the bravest customer service smile of my life, and told the woman that there was an issue with the badge laminate machine and could she wait just 5 more minutes while the office manager came to verify. The woman, our narrator says, smiled and said of course. The police arrived in 7. The badge, in retrospect, had been fabricated using a print template the grandmother had purchased online for $47. The numeric identifier, which she had no way of knowing was generated and stored on a closed system, was a string of digits she had simply made up. The laminate had been done at a print shop. The photograph of herself had been adequate. The font on a name strip had not been. The mother, our narrator says, came directly from the hospital, still in scrubs. She did not enter the daycare. She picked up Marcus at the back door, where the staff had, in the meantime, taken him. The grandmother was charged with attempted custodial interference and forgery. The hearing was set for November. The narrator's last line, very dry, was this: "We have not, in the 3 months since, had another forged badge." The font, however, is now visibly different on every legitimate one as well. Just to be sure, Brittany trusted her training. Our next narrator did not, at first, trust what she was seeing. And the mistake she made, she says, was waiting too long to ask whether what she was seeing was real. This story comes from her /letsnotmeet. Our narrator is a 38-year-old hospital cleaner working the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift on the surgical recovery floor of a regional medical center in upstate New York. She had been at the hospital for 11 years. The surgical recovery floor at 3 in the morning, she says, is one of the quietest places on earth. 2 nurses at the central desk. Occasional muffled monitor beeps. The long fluorescent lit corridor. 18 patient rooms. And her cleaning cart. The corridor windows ran along the south wall. They looked out onto a small fenced courtyard that had not been maintained since a renovation 7 years earlier. At night, the windows were black. Black enough, our narrator says, to function as mirrors when she walked along them with her cart. On the first night, in late October, she noticed someone walking behind her in the reflection, far enough back that she could not, in the curve of the glass, make out a face. Just a figure, roughly her own height, following her in step down the corridor. She turned. The corridor was empty. She told one of the nurses, who said, kindly, that the night shift sometimes makes the brain do that. Peripheral motion blur, fluorescent flicker. Our narrator agreed. She had a flask of coffee. She kept working. The figure was there again on the second night, and on the third. By the 5th night, our narrator had started watching the window deliberately on every pass. The figure was always behind her, always at the same distance, about 8 feet, always walking when she walked and stopping when she stopped, always present in the reflection, never present in the corridor when she turned. On the 7th night, our narrator did something she had been afraid to do all week. She walked the entire length of the corridor without turning around. She watched the figure in the window the whole way. When she reached the end, she turned slowly. The corridor was again empty, but this time the door of room 12 was open just a fraction of an inch, just enough for a slice of dim interior light to fall onto the corridor tile. Room 12 had not, all week, had a patient assigned to it. It was being held empty for a transfer expected from the ICU on the following Monday. Our narrator knew this. She had cleaned it on Tuesday and had, since then, walked past it every shift without going in. She approached the door. The patient in room 12 had been transferred late on Sunday afternoon, while our narrator was off. He was a 56-year-old man recovering from a long surgery, on a ventilator, mostly sedated, capable of standing up but not of speaking. The transfer paperwork had been filed in the system, but not yet posted to the corridor whiteboard. The night shift charge nurse, who had also been off for the weekend, had assumed our narrator already knew. He had, the staff later determined, been getting up at night when his sedation lightened, a behavior the nursing team had not yet been able to fully address, and standing inside his doorway, just back from the gap, watching out at the corridor. The geometry of room 12, in relation to the long south windows, made his reflection appear in the glass the way a shadow appears at the edge of a flashlight beam. Visible if your angle of approach was right, invisible if you turned to face him directly. Our narrator says she finished her shift. She made the report. She did not work the surgical recovery floor at night again. Not because the patient had meant her any harm, she emphasizes, but because the small relief of the explanation had not, in fact, made the 7 nights of being followed any less real in her body when she remembered them. Her last line, which the upvoters in our /letsnotmeet pinned in the comments. Please, if you can, leave a light on in the rooms you are not using. That's a story where the explanation was, in the end, a benign one. Our next narrator's story is benign too, but only for one of the people involved. This story comes from our /MaliciousCompliance. Our narrator is a help desk technician at a mid-sized law firm in Chicago. He's 25. He's been at the firm for 14 months. The firm had 94 lawyers, 3 IT staff, 2 senior, 1 junior, and a single, somewhat delicate company-wide priority ticket system. Tickets came in 3 flavors: P1, P2, and P3. P1 was reserved for things that prevented a lawyer from billing: non-functional time-tracking software, broken VPN to court systems, down to email. P2 was for inconveniences. P3 was for the long tail: lost mice, password resets, missing headphones. The historical practice had been simple. Help desk techs triaged the incoming ticket and tagged it themselves. P1 went to the senior on call. P2 and P3 cycled into the queue. In late spring, the firm hired a new IT director from a much larger consulting environment. Let's call him Brett. Brett, in his second all-staff IT meeting, announced a new policy. From now on, only Brett would assign P1 tags. Junior techs would log every incoming ticket as P3 by default. If our narrator believed an issue warranted a P1, he was instructed. These are Brett's exact words from the meeting recording, which our narrator had to keep on file for compliance reasons anyway, to bring it to my desk and let me decide what is broken. Our narrator, in his post, says he sat in the meeting and counted ceiling tiles for the second half. He went back to his desk. He read the policy memo. He noticed that the memo did not, technically, define what counted as broken. It only stated who had the authority to decide. He went home that evening and thought about it. The next morning, our narrator began executing the new policy with what he calls exactly the diligence asked for. A lawyer's printer jammed at 8:42 a.m. He tagged the ticket P1 and walked the printout of the ticket number to Brett's desk. A different lawyer's printer jammed at 9:14 a.m. Same procedure. A third lawyer's printer on the same machine that had jammed twice jammed at 9:38 a.m. Our narrator, he reports, was at Brett's desk 13 times before lunch. By the end of the first week, our narrator had filed 47 P1 tickets, almost all of them paper jams on the firm's 3 communal printers. Brett had personally walked over to the printers between meetings 11 times. He had not yet figured out, our narrator says, that the firm's communal printers were old and jammed approximately 90 times a week across the 3 of them combined. By the end of the second week, our narrator had filed 138. By the end of the third, 247. Brett, in week 4, called a meeting with our narrator. He explained, with what our narrator describes as visible strain, that perhaps not every paper jam should be treated as a P1. Our narrator, he says, was prepared for this. He produced, laminated, color-coded, in a tabbed folder, Brett's original policy memo, the IT manual definition of P1, any issue preventing a billable lawyer from completing a billable task, and a contemporaneous timestamp log demonstrating that, in each of the 247 cases, a lawyer had been physically blocked from printing a court filing, a deposition transcript, or an invoice by the jam in question. He invited Brett, politely, to provide an updated definition of P1 in writing. Brett did. The next day, the new memo specified that P1 was reserved for issues affecting more than 2 lawyers simultaneously and lasting more than 15 minutes. Our narrator returned to his desk, made coffee, and resumed his old triage practice. The 247 tickets, he notes, were in the firm's quarterly IT report. The senior partner who chaired the IT Oversight Committee, a man with a reputation, our narrator says, for reading every line of every report, asked Brett, in writing, whether the previous quarter's P1 volume reflected a sudden infrastructure failure or a procedural one. Brett left the firm in February. Our narrator's post ends with one line: "We bought new printers in March." Brett's mistake was assuming his own policy was just words on paper. Our final narrator's story is about a regular customer, a man who, for 19 years, had been making sure his words on paper, after he was gone, would still mean something. Our final story comes from our /BestofRedditorUpdates. The original post was from a waitress in Wichita, Kansas. The update, the part this story turns on, came almost a year later from a probate clerk in the same city. The original post was simple. A waitress at a small breakfast diner, 26 years old, working through a community college degree at night, for years on the same morning shift, had been a regular server for an elderly gentleman named, the post said, only Mr. Henley. Mr. Henley came in every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday for the same breakfast, 2 eggs over easy, sausage, dry rye toast, and black coffee. Total bill, with tax, was $11.40. He always tipped 20%. He always sat at the same booth. He had been doing this for 7 years. In early March of last year, Mr. Henley did not come in on a Saturday. The waitress noticed. The diner's owner, who knew Mr. Henley's first name and had occasionally chatted with him at the register, checked the local obituaries on Sunday morning and found one. Mr. Henley had passed away on the previous Wednesday at the age of 89. The funeral was private. The waitress, in her original post, said she was sad about it for a week. She left flowers on his usual booth on the following Tuesday. She did not expect anything else. 2 weeks later, on a Monday afternoon, an attorney walked into the diner and asked for her by name. He had a sealed envelope from Mr. Henley's estate. She opened it at the end of her shift, in the booth where Mr. Henley had always sat. Inside the envelope were $5,000 in clean $100 bills, a typed letter on plain paper signed by Mr. Henley, and a smaller folded note. The typed letter said, "I have appreciated 4 years of mornings. The cash is for the part of your tuition I assume you have not yet figured out how to pay for. The note is private. With thanks, Ash." The folded note inside said, "You are the 18th, if I have counted correctly. Be discreet. Ash." The waitress, in her post, said she had no idea what the second note meant. She used the money on her tuition. She finished her degree. She hugged the booth in the parking lot when she left on her last shift. The update came 11 months later from someone different. A probate clerk at the Sedgwick County Courthouse in Wichita, posting in her /BestofRedditorUpdates with the executor's permission, said, "I'm the clerk who processed the estate of the man in this story. I have to tell you something none of you noticed about the second note." The clerk's post said that, in the course of clearing Mr. Henley's papers, the executor had found a small leather-bound notebook in the home office. Inside the notebook were 19 pages, dated going back to 2005. Each page had a first name, a city, the name of a diner or coffee shop or breakfast cafe, a brief paragraph of observations, and a single line at the bottom, a number. The waitress in Wichita was number 18. There were 19 pages. Mr. Henley had been a retired actuary. He had, the executor said, lived modestly on a modest pension. The estate, when fully accounted, had been just over $100,000. The clerk's post said the executor had, with Mr. Henley's clear written instructions, contacted each of the other 18 people listed in the notebook. 8 had received their envelopes during Mr. Henley's life. 10, including, eventually, the Wichita waitress, received them after. Each had been a young person, almost always a working-class woman, almost always finishing some kind of education on her own, whom Mr. Henley had observed over the course of months or years while traveling. He kept careful notes. He never made himself known. He never returned to a place after leaving an envelope. The clerk's post listed, with the executor's permission and with first names only, the cities and amounts: Wichita, Topeka, Springfield, Tulsa, Lincoln, Des Moines, 2 in St. Louis. Each amount was different. Each was sized, the executor said in his statement, to the unfilled portion of a known education or training expense. Information Mr. Henley had collected, somehow, by simply listening in coffee shops for years to people talking on phones or to friends about what they were trying to pay for. The clerk closed the post with this line: he was 89. He had been doing this since he was 70. He never told anyone in his family. The original waitress in Wichita will not see this post. She has my permission to be told. The other 17, by his explicit instruction, will not be. The original waitress, our narrator says, did see the post. She replied to it once, in a comment that has since been deleted by her. The comment, before deletion, said, I sat in the booth where I read his note. I want to thank him. I cannot. Tell the 17 when you tell them that the 18th says hello. 5 stories. A retired regulator who waited. A receptionist who kept her voice even. A cleaner who, in the end, asked us to leave a light on. A help desk technician who counted ceiling tiles. And a man who, after working for 40 years, spent the next 19 reading the strangers around him with the kind of attention almost no one ever gives. If any of these landed for you, the channel keeps making them. Tuesday and Friday. Subscribe to catch the next one. Thanks for listening. And, Mr. Henley, wherever you are, the 18 still says hello. Chapters. JSON. Chapters. Title. The Mulch Wars, *word. 200, subreddit. ProRevenge, permalink. /r/ProRevenge, /comments, /pilot, 3story1 / Title. The Forged Badge, *word. 880, subreddit. EntitledParents, permalink. /r/EntitledParents /comments /pilot 3story2 /badge / Title. The Figure in the Window, *word. 1535, subreddit. Let's Not Meet, permalink. /r/Let's-not-meet /comments /pilot 3story3 /figure / Title. 247 jams, *word. 2110, subreddit. MaliciousScompliance, permalink. /r/MaliciousCompliance /comments /pilot 3story4 /247 jam / Title. The 18th envelope, *word. 2710, subreddit. BestofRedditorUpdates, permalink. /r/BestofRedditorUpdates /comments /pilot 3story5 /.